Venri Chapter 19. Timeline. Priority, Tuchanka. Shepard. She was cuffed to a wall, hands over her head. It was cold. She could feel the blood run down her wrists. The cuffs were programmed to spike into her skin if she struggled, or if she slept and her weight pulled on them, resulting in a raw ring of punctures around each wrist. This didn't keep her from struggling, and eventually it didn't keep her from falling asleep before it woke her seconds later. She had been here for a while. Hunger and thirst and lack of sleep combined with the cold and the pain, giving panic a purchase in her thoughts. She stopped struggling with the promise to herself that she would start again when her heart rate was under control and she'd beaten the panic back. She remembered biotics and then forgot them, then remembered them again. She tried to gather her will to generate a pulse and nothing. She either couldn't remember how to or she imagined sophisticated cuffs, sophisticated dampeners. She couldn't remember getting here, didn't remember how this happened. Her eyes were covered with a blindfold. Her naked back scraped open against the jagged stone behind her, and her wrists opened new wounds as she forgot her promise to not panic. She stilled when she sensed someone was in the room with her. She tried to get a location from the sound, cursed the pounding in her ears, and tried to focus. Where was it? A sudden sound and movement from her right startled her again as she heard, "Venri, it's going to be okay. You're safe now." Garrus! He rushed to her, his hands finding her. The relief was powerful, crashing through all of her fear and caution, adrenaline surging into her bloodstream, erasing pain and causing her body to shake. His hand reached up to grasp her wrists in the restraints. His other hand traveled to her throat, where there was a band or a collar. Maybe what suppressed her biotics? "Get them off me. Get them off me. We need..." His mouth moved to hers, and she temporarily forgot everything. But the feel of him, his warmth, the way his arms crushed her to him. Her mouth silent, her mind always thinking when he was near her, "I love you, I love you, I love you." Dizziness blended with her disorientation, and the way he was moving her body caused her wrists to twist in the cuffs, which caused a fresh spurt of blood. He found a catch to one of the cuffs and released her hand, drawing her wrist to his mouth and licking at a long line of blood trailing down her arm. He turned her hand over, kissed the back of it gently, and then replaced it in the cuff. Icy horror crashed in on her as his hands lingered on the bonds, but did nothing to free her from them. No, 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 please, no. He removed her blindfold, and she saw his face in all the wrong silvers and blues. Indoctrination splitting open the lines of his plates, revealing circuitry. He smiled, stepped to her, his arm around her waist, one hand at her throat, a finger playing at the edge of the collar. He began to lick at her neck with slow contentment. "I told you, Venri. You're safe. It won't hurt if you don't struggle. We will be together now. Always." She surged awake with a scream, sweating and trembling. The nightmares were getting worse. more sophisticated. Her waking obsession with the idea of indoctrination was giving her mind the fuel to re-script each time she closed her eyes. She was safe from nightmare when Garrus was here, but often lately he wasn't. Coordination with Paladin was on a different schedule than the one dictated by her duties on the Normandy. Grief intruded and fresh memory. Morden. Garrus had sent her here to sleep after she'd lost Morden. A flash of memory of the dream, Garrus's hands moving over her in the dark, proving how well he knew her body. His scent, with a new, dark and bitter undertone, made her dizzy as it always had. He smelled like an addiction, still, just more so. Coffee, chocolate, durian. Fear of him was always part of what had attracted her to him. Fear wasn't new. Cold and hungry and thirsty disappeared under the assault of his mouth, his voice, his hands. She was weak, and she couldn't resist. That was a lie. She was strong, and she wouldn't resist. There was nothing she wanted in the outside world if he wasn't there. She'd stay here with him. Gods, please make it stop. She longed for the oblivion that his arms and body brought to her, the comfort of his voice at her ear. But now that was being twisted, and she resisted calling him on the comm. He could be here in moments, and she could lose herself in his presence. She wouldn't do it. She didn't want to tell him. She didn't want to lie. She didn't want to find out that she flinched if he touched her. That isn't the real problem, is it? The real problem is that you're never going to flinch when he touches you. From her dreams, she remembered thinking that he was going to let her hands out of the cuffs. He knows you won't hurt him, and your hands will trace over his back, wanting to pull the tubes and wires that crawl over his form off, but you won't. You're going to pull him to you. Press your breasts against his chest and listen to his voice in your ear, promising you forever. He's going to lick a line over the collar at your throat and promise when you are your new self how proud he will be to be yours. He's always been proud to be yours. He's still Garrus. He's still himself enough to tear you into pieces and make you beg him to do it again. He still gives you hope that he's in there. He's in there, and you can't ever leave him. You were wrong, Shepard. Very wrong about how indoctrination works. Let me show you. Morden, you could have given me something to fix this when you weren't out saving the potential lives of generations of unborn Krogan. You could have helped me, and now you're gone. I could have helped you. And now you're gone. Gods. No. Spirits. Please, spirits. Forgive me for thinking of asking Morden for anything else. He gave his life. He's gone. She clutched at the locket that was only possible through Morden's work. Forgive me, Morden. please. In her dreams, Garrus feeds her by hand, saying he always wanted to know what the names of the food she liked were, and now he has the time. He's gonna press a cup to your lips and lick the side of your mouth where water overflows. You're going to hope you can bring him back to you. He's in there. You're going to hope he can't bring you to him. He promises he can't wait to see what you look like in your new colors, your new markings, matching his. And that it will be your choice. He'll laugh about when you managed to get another set of cuffs off the wall and get out of this room. He admires your resourcefulness. Always has. He tells you that you strangled 5 centuries before you were brought down, cuffs still on. He's sorry that the new cuffs hurt, and they had trouble saving your hand before, but they'll just grow a few clones for spare parts if needed. You'll be fine. He'll make you forget. He'll start over. He's been doing this for a while. I'm so sorry. Morden, I'm so sorry. I have failed you. Garrus, I'm so sorry. I don't want to fail you. Jagged sobs racked her as she clenched her eyes closed and felt the grief and fear overtake her. She forced herself to feel it fully in the same way she'd force herself to look at reality. I need to know. I can't fix it if I don't know. It's just a dream. It's your fears playing out for you in your sleep. You know that. You know it can't get you while you're awake. You're lying. You know it can. You know it does. You know that your fingers run over his plates, reassured there's nothing there that shouldn't be there. You compare his voice to the one in your dreams, and you can't tell the difference. Because it's from inside your head, dumbass. Of course it's the same. Think. Odds of his indoctrination taking place based on what you know and suspect. 39%. Odds that his indoctrination results in your capture. 100%. Odds of him indoctrinating you. 99%. You're gonna cling to that 1% because you know you talked Saren into eating a bullet. You can have it. Is it a comfort or a trap? Follow me, Venri. For once, follow me. I've followed you everywhere. I've earned this. We've earned this. No more desperation, no more doubt or worry. We would be invincible together. Immortality. He knows he has you, and he's giving you time to show him. He has nothing else to do but convince you. He shows you everyone is dead. Everyone you knew. Palvin, Earth, all gone. Nothing left to fight for. 50,000 years before the next cycle begins, menaced by Taurian and human-shaped reapers. He tells you that he altered the indoctrination process because you told him it was flawed, and he agreed. He's the first with autonomy based on your suggestions. He thanks you for your insight. You never dream about who you'd be after indoctrination. That doesn't scare you as much. You're realistic enough to know that if you were indoctrinated, you'd feel bliss. Your thoughts would be the same and your purpose unopposed. That's not a nightmare. The nightmare part is being separated from him and knowing that you will step into that bliss with eyes open if he asks you to. Eventually. Or you'll kill him. It tells you that he's the only person you will talk to. You've killed 3 other caretakers just recently. If you try to harm him, he'll do it for you. He'll break his own bones until you beg him to stop. He said he would. You don't doubt it. He doesn't need to do anything to restrain you other than threaten to break his own fingers. He'd cut a shallow line along his throat, and you'd applied Metagel with shaking fingers while he looked at you with burning blue eyes, still his color behind the metallic whir. He put a gun on the table between you once. Your hands were free. You thought your hands were free. You wouldn't take it. He opened the door to the outside, and when you asked him if he would leave with you, and he said no, he closed it. He will only leave with you when your skin blooms blue and silver, like his. Congratulations on getting Saren to shoot himself. Did it end? No. He got stronger. It severed the last of his will, and he was just another jumpy fucker that almost killed you. He didn't have the intelligence, the subtlety, the dedication that Garrus has. And Morden is really dead. Odds of winning anything if you get no sleep. 0%. It won't hurt if you don't struggle. Please don't let this be indoctrination, steadily cannibalizing what sense I have left. Let me show you. She closed her eyes and tried to block her thoughts from traveling any further down that road. It was a dream. I've always had dreams. My mind, calculating every outcome that I can think of, is what has kept me alive so far. It's just fear. Fear will pass. Reverie is hypnotic, and you promise him anything, everything. And you mean it. That last flash of remembrance leaves a memory that sends her lurching to the bathroom and vomiting up bile. She thinks of seashells instead. Morden is gone. Morden is safe from indoctrination. Morden fought back. Morden would have liked it to run tests on the seashells. You're not doing this for yourself. This isn't about you. Don't let fear change who you are. Garrus is your reason to live, and you will solve any problem if it happens, when it happens. You will not create a problem that doesn't exist. You're awake. You have your mind now. You can't allow him to be poisoned through your fingertips or your voice. You will control yourself and welcome him, and you will never, ever give him a hint that this is inside your head. Spirits, I hope I don't talk in my sleep. Your grieving and being upset and unsteady will be forgiven. Heal. Seashells and healing. You are not permitted to fail. You killed 5 centuries, bitch. Live up to it. You know you're scary in your dreams. That has to count for something. I can have anything I want of you, Venri. That wasn't from a dream. That was a part of the truth that caused this fear. Seashells. She opened her locket, rubbing along the mandible as though it were also a seashell, opening it with apprehension but unwilling to react to his scent in person. Badly. She took a breath. It was him. It was not poisoned, and her heart would mend. She wouldn't let this clear, pure thing be violated. It's just another fight on a new front, an escalation in the arms race. Her crying turned into something cleaner, and she stood and got under the spray of the shower, resting her head on the tile. I love you. I love you. I love you. Garrus. Everything was wrong. They were doing the best they could, but so much was wrong. Morden's death had shocked Moram into a shell of herself. He didn't think anybody else other than maybe Liara saw it. She was professional and unreachable, efficient and inconsolable. Amid the coordination of forces from Tuchanka to Palaven, he'd gotten little sleep, seen her hardly at all. He was sure she was having nightmares in the time he was away from her. He hadn't been this tired since Omega. The choices weren't about him, and he had no agency over the outcome as he would with a rifle. It was never the right time to sleep with a choice being made, results coming in, and the next choice being made. Missing any of those crucial steps would escalate into losing astronomical numbers of civilians and forces. His mind was fried, his body screaming, but he still knew he needed to do what he was doing, minute by minute. He'd been in the habit of spending time with Victus, but now he was off the ship and the war table was abandoned. He did his work from the battery now, a solitary vigil. Once again, the only Turian on the ship. He was beginning to reach the point where he was 51% debilitated, and he'd need to rest in order to do that living thing that happened between making plans. The door opened behind him, and he knew it must be her, even before the waft of air brought her scent with it. Nobody else visited him. He made his way out into the ship most days, but people waited until he was out of the battery, usually to talk. He preferred it that way. He turned, and she stood there, wan and diminished, holding a drink and a meal for him. What he saw in her face was more wrong. He wanted to comfort her, go to her, but the extent of his exhaustion hit him fully. Far past 51%. She looked at the bench lining the battery and decided he wouldn't make it. Sat down on the floor in front of him and started to lay the food out, open the drink. arranged utensils. That seemed like a really good idea, and he sat down opposite her and sighed as his legs stopped trembling and were only aching. It wasn't that comfortable. He couldn't sit like she did, cross-legged. He'd break important things that way. He sat sideways with his knees up, spurs safe. He looked at her for a long moment, trying to think of something to say. She smiled gently, and the lines of her face resembled the woman he loved. She pointed to the food. Eat. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then nodded. He was usually on a schedule, and right now he didn't know what time it was or when he last ate. He'd ignored all alarms and focused on the disposition of troop movements and supply lines. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and every time he seemed to be forming a thought or about to talk, she'd look down at the food and the drink, and she seemed companionably willing to keep him silent company. His back and shoulders were protesting, and he began to wonder if he'd be able to stand up. "You want me to get a cot in here?" He leaned back to ease the strain on his spine. "No. Thank you for the food. If I can't make it to the elevator, I shouldn't be working." She looked at him skeptically. "Can you make it to the elevator?" "Remains to be seen. You'll carry me, right?" "Sure." He laughed. She smiled. The food didn't make him feel any better, but it did ground him in the moment. He needed at least 4 hours of sleep. He looked at her. She picked up the remains of his meal, threw them away, reached her hand down. He took it, and she helped him stand. There was impressive cracking of plates and spine and bones. "Everything okay in there?" Yeah, I'm fine. Let's go to bed." "Shower first?" "No." "Shower first. Come on. I'll scrub your plates for you." "I hope that's a euphemism." "No, you don't. You're exhausted. You're afraid." "I'm afraid." "Just a shower." "I love you so much." "I love you too, you ginormous, spiky dork." You mean that in a sexy way, right? He stood on his own after a few tries, and they made their way toward the elevator. "Oh, spirits, it's so far. Can I do the cut thing instead?" She put an arm around his waist and pulled his arm over her shoulder. He leaned on her. They made it to the elevator, and he leaned against the back wall. "No, this is fun. This is good. Right here. Leave me. Save yourself. Don't fall asleep." "Demands. You're such a bitch." "I mean it." "Just a little sleep. You'll fall over and crash. You promised to carry me." "Fortunately, we're here. Come on." He groaned as he rallied his muscles to pull away from the wall, and he swayed. She steadied him. She pulled him into the cabin and then leaned him up against the wall while she started taking his armor off. I love this wall. So much. She was quiet, but her face looked more like her. She was grieving. He vaguely remembered people were going to die while he was able to look at her face and have her scrub his plates, but she was his motivation. He was only one Taurian. He needed to rest. He tilted his head back and tried to stand steady, but a few of her yanks unbalanced him. She steadied him. She told him to hold still, and he thought maybe he could do that. His eyes were closed. He heard the sounds of her undressing and setting the water temperature for him. He liked it hotter than she did. He could barely feel it, and she said it was near to scalding. He liked the steam. Now that his muscles and bones were cracking, he realized he had a nasty headache. She brought him an analgesic and a glass of water. He thanked her weakly while she waited, put the glass down, and then pulled him to the shower, scrubbed him while he stood there, face up in the spray, swaying, praying for the pain to recede. Spirits, let me make it to the bed. She pulled him out of the shower in careful steps and dried him gently but thoroughly, getting under plates. His eyes were closed. He enjoyed her hands while the pain faded from the medication and food, feeling rejuvenated. She took a moment to dry herself, shaking the wet off her hair into a towel. She pressed her forehead to his crest and then pulled him by both hands to the bed. She held a hand on his chest to stop him and then pulled the blankets back and helped him in. He groaned with the pleasure of giving in to gravity. There was no question of sex, but there was also no question of sleep until she scooted into the other side of the bed in their accustomed position, his arm under her neck, his other arm around her waist, his mouth at the back of her neck, her spine against his sternum blade, and her ass cradled in the bend of his hips, thighs pressed to him. Home. He was home. He breathed her scent in and relaxed. He said in the formal words that came to him of home, "My home is where the shadow of my Venri crosses the threshold." And he surrendered to sleep. An unspecified amount of time later, not enough for him to be rested, he woke to the sound of her voice. Pain whimpers. He held still and listened. His impulse was to draw her to him and wake her, but he was also voyeuristically curious about her dreams. He was beginning to think he should conspire with Dr. Shakwas to spike her drink with something that would help her sleep, but he wasn't to that point yet. He wasn't sure he wouldn't get there, but he owed her a conversation, a warning first. The fear of tipping her further into nightmare without being able to wake up, which would likely be the result while he blissfully slept, kept him from seriously considering it. Yet. Garrus. His heart clenched. This wasn't one of her dreams where she recounted the lost. He needed to step very carefully here. She was grieving, she was exhausted and dispirited. She hadn't called Morden's name as he'd expected. What happens in your head, Venri. What I wouldn't give right now to be in a sari, slip into your mind and be there with you. He imagined asking Liara to help, and he rejected that idea also. Even if she could help, that was an unbearable level of vulnerability to ask of Morim. It would be presenting her as a problem to the crew. If he asked, he had no doubt she would submit to medication or Liara or whatever he felt best. Eventually. If she could be brought to see it didn't just affect her. Unworthy to make it about the crew or about him. Manipulative. Possible later plan, but not the first scouting. She was backed up against him, her hand digging into his thigh, drawing blood at a plate rift. He suppressed a growl at the urge to draw her body back harder against him. He wanted so much to turn her pain into pleasure. She glowed a shimmering blue before breaking into a cry of frustration and pain. Please, Morim, no more biotics in your sleep. I've been through this. It is not fun. This was very bad. His earlier sense in the day of everything being wrong returned to him, and he tilted his head carefully to be able to see her face more clearly. Pain. Regret. Grief. Something else that looked as close to surrender as he'd seen on her face. In her unguarded moments, she feared not just loss in battle, but loss of will. Her scent had an edge of fear. Now he was wide awake, watching and listening and not moving his body in response to her writhing. What is in your mind? The new thing was the surrender. It had not been there before. Follow that lead. Carefully. The curtain of Morim would descend and block him out if he didn't move with caution. He tamped back his own panic and inadequacy and realized he was the only qualified person to be rooting around in her brain when she was incapacitated. He could wake her as though nothing had happened, but she would do this again, alone, unless he did something now. A suspicion started to form based on her scent and reactions. He decided to investigate that dark alley in her mind. His hand moved over hers, and she gripped his hand until he felt the plates would crack. The blue returned around her, and her neck was strained to cords of muscle and breath. He closed his eyes, trying to feel his way in the dark. He asked her, "Venri, tell me what you see." She responded to his voice by arching back against him. "Garrus, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know. How did this happen to you? Why wasn't I there? I don't remember. Please." The dark fog from the alleyway lifted and resettled on more ominous shapes. He understood that in her nightmares he was indoctrinated. Sharp, physical pain gripped his chest. Deep anguish gripped his mind. Praying for mercy would get him exactly nowhere. He swallowed hard, thinking that he'd been making life and death choices enough today, and he shouldn't be intimidated by a dreaming woman, but he was. Make her show you. Be the man she needs. He released his limbs from stasis and allowed his hands to move over her body. Gentle, but insistent. If what he suspected was true, he shouldn't speak until she was awake. Avoid twisting the knife in her gut while pointing out its presence to her. Her voice was anguished and needing as she thrust her breast into his hand, nipple hard against his palm. This was going to hurt. In an effort to flank her, he kissed at the back of her throat, pulled her against him, using his teeth, until he was sure she had come awake entirely. The twist in her limbs had relaxed deliberately. She was aware of herself and still shaking off the dream. He settled his hands around her body and told her, "Venri, I had a nightmare." She was very still, her breathing and pulse out of control for crucial seconds. "It's just a dream. Go back to sleep." "It haunts me while I am awake. I dream of you being indoctrinated." Her breath sucked in and she bit her lip, eyes closed. "Confirmation. Tell me." She shook her head. "Please, let it go." "You can't. I won't." Her lip jutted in a stubborn curve. "I'm telling you to let it go." He tightened his arms around her. "And I'm telling you I won't. Tell me." She changed tactics. "Why did I marry you?" She wriggled her ass against him and he groaned and then growled. "Stop it, evil space harpy." "I don't want to tell you because I don't want to hurt you. This is bad. This is ugly. This hurts. Please, let it go." "My beloved, no. I'm going to drag it out of you into the light, whether or not you want me to." That's the problem, right there. You talk in your sleep, Venri. You're using biotics in your sleep. You are in pain. I've held my tongue until now, granted you privacy and patience, but it is getting worse. You are not managing well. I'm giving you absolute fair warning, Morim. I've considered drugging you in collusion with Karen and asking Liara to help resolve this. This is a problem. I am not going behind your back. Okay, I'm behind your back, but we're talking metaphorically here. I'm going to get it done, and you know I can. So spit it out. She tried to struggle away, and he held her against him. She lit up blue, and he saw it only a patch of a second before he was torn away from her, his talons leaving gashes deep in her skin across her hip and shoulder. He thought, I believe you. This is bad. This is ugly. Pain lit up his head as his fringe was knocked into his skull against the wall. She had a cool down. He had seconds before she did this again, and he had no doubt she would. He sheathed talons that were itching to fight back. She was beyond herself with anger, and her eyes were flame and retribution. This is the wrong time to think she's stunning. While she's stunning, seconds. He didn't make it far before she knocked him back again, force-throwing the items in the room around in scattered whirls. He should back down, but he only considered it for a flashing moment before he rejected the idea and lunged for her. No more words. She started it, he'd finish it. Very close quarters. She couldn't get away from him here. He realized quickly she didn't want to get away from him. She wanted to hurt him. When his arms were almost around her, she chopped at his waist at a vicious angle, and when he was bent over in pain, she rammed her knee into his chin and followed up with another biotic blast, spinning him sideways into the same painful wall. Broken glass became a new hazard. Seconds. He had seconds and bones yet unbroken. He didn't want to hurt her, but he would enjoy subduing her. Crazy was not going to win. He lunged for her again and managed to get her hand in his, but he lost his knee to a kick from her while he bent her pinky back in an attempt to control her with the pain as a threat. No, that just made her angrier. She turned to look at him with green fire and contempt, and she leaned into his grip until her finger snapped. Then she punched him directly in the nose with the other hand. There was a sickening crack he heard and felt. Then she knocked him back again, blue forming around him. Oh, fuck. He loved this woman so very much, and she was going to kill him. I told you this was going to hurt. I had no idea how much. Another blue barrage smashed through him while he was still down. He scrambled to avoid a kick to his back, hoping that she wasn't really aiming for the vital nerve cluster. She'd only chopped his waist to disable him, to hurt him. Just exactly how crazy was she? From her eyes? Lots of crazy. Between a cool down, he rolled to her feet and pulled them out from under her, avoiding her landing on him with the elbow she had ready on her way down. He laughed because Thane had told him humor was a gift he gave her, right? Oh, spirits, I should be sorry, but I'm really not. She no longer looked broken. He definitely was broken, but he liked the trade. He grabbed her while she struggled, but he knew he had her because grappling was his turf. To avoid the next round of biotics, he got under her, her body on top, head banging on his sternum blade, hands at her sides, his arms locked over them, glass along his back. Another burst of biotics, and they were thrust into the air to bounce off the floor, air knocked out of both of them, glass digging further in, fringe providing another tearing reminder of what it meant to anger his bondmate. He thought, you are my bondmate, and the only way you can stop me is to kill me. Her legs twined with his, and he realized she was going to try to snap his spurs off with her toes. She was human and in pain, but he was Taurian, and a deep thrum of approval and admiration flooded him along with his concern for her safety. He was good enough to get behind her locked doors and see this face, feel this fight. She wouldn't kill him for witnessing it or provoking it. Well, maybe, but he wasn't dead yet, and she could have killed him several times by now. He squeezed her until he knew she couldn't draw in breath and then got her legs trapped with his. She was immobile, but she was still lifting them off the floor periodically. He had her, and he was laughing from that knowing Taurian sense of his soul. His head was turned to the side, and he struggled to stay on the bottom despite her attempts to twist out of his grip. If she did this with her on the bottom, she'd be worse off than he was. He was in terrible shape, blood dripping down the back of his throat from the worst broken nose he'd ever had, and he'd had a few. His knee burned like the phosphorus in their bonding ceremony. Everywhere she kicked and hit felt like he'd been dented, plates buckling into his skin, glass ground in and free pieces under plates on skin that had never felt air. He squeezed to restrain her further, and she didn't give up, but she did pass out from lack of oxygen eventually. He relaxed his shoulders, but didn't trust that she was actually out for a while, because she was a true Bakan. He held her tightly enough to restore pressure at any second for a few minutes, until he began to trust the rise and fall of her chest as her head stayed slumped to the side. Well, he was onto something, that was for sure. Oh, shit, ask a big question. Despite his fierce pride in the progress they were making, he still had to get it out of her. He wasn't going to call Karen because it might get worse. He had no idea what was going to happen when she woke up. She was going to wake up. He'd better move his ass. He had a few ideas, grabbing the Metagel and slathering it over both of them. She hadn't lost that much blood other than the gashes on her hip and shoulder. Her finger was a clean break. He set it to the best of his ability. Her knuckles were mangled, toes and knees and elbows lacerated from contact with him. She might have other breaks, but it wasn't clear. Again, he should be sorry, but he couldn't find that anywhere. Exultant and terrified were all he had to hand. The worst of his own injuries were internal. He had enough combat experience to gauge whether or not he was going to bleed to death. He was still exhausted, but with the adrenaline and purpose, he had a few hours. And if they didn't get their shit together by then, he was going to have to tap out. If she let him. He grabbed 2 of the analgesic tablets and swallowed them, feeling some real anxiety about letting her just wake up and start over. I am in unknown territory here. He'd still rather she shattered his joints than let her suffer in her sleep. He had to finish what he started. Get her to talk. I'm still walking. Maybe not for long, but you still can't stop me unless you kill me. He found a blanket and carefully rolled her up inside of it, her arms trapped. She was physically immobilized. What about the biotics? It's cheap, but I'm gonna do it. He hefted the hamster cage. She would not harm her baby. I hope. You have fallen far in the world, Shakarian, hiding behind Boo. Fuck yeah, I'm hiding behind Boo. Did you see that magnificent creature at work? Hide! He carefully propped her up on the bed. He sat next to her with the hamster in his lap until he moved a pillow between the cage and his knee. He'd realized while wrapping up her body that his scary wife hadn't been eating. She'd brought him dinner, but he would have bet his rifle she hadn't eaten anything herself. How is it that he overestimated the amount she was going to care for herself? Consistently. People were dying on Palaven over this. She couldn't eat lunch while people were dying? People dying was the reason she couldn't eat lunch. As if he needed more evidence that he was not the best leader. First Sidonis, then this, falling apart under pressure, endangering her. You didn't eat lunch. This is why this is happening. You lost track of yourself for 1, maybe 3 days, and she was trying to help you. She did help you. Now it's time to help her, no matter where it started. This is what he had to work with. He moved carefully, putting Boo down between him and her, and scrounged for some cookies. He grabbed some water and analgesic tablets for her, noticing that the positioning of his hamster shield took up a majority of his attention as he limped and hopped around the cabin. He waited beside her on the bed. The pain was excruciating, but also cleansing, steeling him for more of a fight. She'd taught him some things about persistence. A few minutes passed before her neck stirred, then she made a grimace of pain, and then her eyes opened. He let her soak in the circumstances. She looked around, took a deep breath. He could see her try to move in the blanket, then realize she couldn't. She closed her eyes and took in another long, slow breath. She ignored him. He gave her some time. She reopened her eyes, looked pointedly at the hamster, and then at him, glaring, though the insane fire in her eyes was replaced by a normal level of insane. Hopefully, progress, as she said. I'm going to get out of this. Eventually. Not until I get what I want. Boo won't protect you. He will for now. He brought a cookie to her mouth, and she glared at him some more. He told her, Moram, I swear to the spirits, if you do not eat something and take this medication, I will find a way to make you do it. She tipped her head back. I know. You think I don't know. I know. Then eat the fucking cookie, Bakan, and take some medication before I find or make a funnel. She chewed, swallowed, accepted the tablets, swallowed, and then said, Does your knee hurt? On a scale of 1 to 10, it's fucking painful. Good. Tell me what set you off. You. You set me off. You do it for me. Your dreams, Bakan. What are my nightmares? They're this. In your dreams, I'm indoctrinated and I have your hamster? You didn't before, but you will now. Stop giving him ideas. He has enough of his own. Every vile thing I think shows up. You want to know my dreams? Okay. She closed her eyes and tilted her head back. I'm bound. A bit like this. It hurts about the same. I'm cuffed to a wall with cuffs that will cut into me if I move too much or put weight on them. I'm tired. I'm cold. I'm naked. I'm in the dark. I'm panicking. Just when my panicking can't get worse, I hear a voice. She opened her eyes. I hear your voice. It's everything I want. It's everything I need. You're in the room with me, and I'm overjoyed, and I don't feel tired or cold or the pain in my hands. I start to tremble with the joy of you calling me Venri. You telling me I'm safe. His guts twist cold. I'm given a passionate kiss from the man I love, my reason to live, and my toes curl on the stone. I'm gonna be free. She glares at him and his hands shake on the cage in his lap. He puts it down on the floor very carefully and quietly. Except that will never happen. I'll be given a choice. Be indoctrinated or stay not indoctrinated in those cuffs. I get to decide because I'm special. She looks down at the blanket and at the cage on the floor. My husband knows me so very well, has all the ingenuity to make me make the right choice. He feeds me by hand, tends my wounds, tells me he has clones for spare parts for the times I break away and kill people before I'm dragged back, have my memory wiped, and we get to start over. He remembers her saying, "That's the problem, right there." A warning. A warning he'd misinterpreted. He'd said he'd drag it out of her, whether or not you want me to. He tried to think of another way he could have gotten her to tell him, but he honestly can't. She has no sense of being a partner, not the way a Taurian would. How did she not know that her dreams of him belonged to him? Morden's dead. Palaven needs him. He's been gone. She's been grieving. These might be the only circumstances to crack her hard enough to let this leak out. Otherwise, she'd still be suffering, and he would not know it. She'd hidden behind grief. She'd done it on purpose, and he was horrified and angry. Everyone's dead, Garrus. There's nothing but me. And him. And 50,000 years with the man who still loves me and wants me to join him. But doesn't care anymore if I do or not, because he's just having so much fun. He tells me he's tweaked the indoctrination process on my suggestions and analysis so he still has his full capacity to shred my will to confetti. Waves of grief and anger and fear lap at her features, changing, sliding and saturating. He knows I won't hurt him. He'll hurt himself for fun to control my behavior. He touches me, and it's you touching me. You're in there. I can't leave you. I will never leave you, and I can never join you. I can't die. I have no mission, nobody left to save. I don't know how you were captured, and you make up a different story each time. I'll get the truth when I make the right choice. Markings that match yours. You keep telling me it won't hurt if I don't struggle. Him. Not you. Him. It's you. It would be lovely if it were him and he were beating me or hurting me or anything, but what you can do to me. What I can do to you, huh? She blew hair out of her face. Congratulations, you've inspired indoctrination porn. I sound badass. Get me out of this fucking blanket. He narrowed his eyes. No, I don't think so. You can order me, as my Ava, as my commander, if you truly believe it is the right thing to do. Go ahead and try it. He stared at her, and she stared back, and then tipped her head back in exhaustion. I told you what you asked me to tell you. But that's not all that I want. Of course it isn't. What do you want? Tell me. Are you ever indoctrinated in your dreams? No. That would be easier. And you hold out. He never indoctrinates you? No, because you can't. Seems like you've got it about right anyway. So what you're telling me is that even in your dreams, I can have sex, but I'll never get in your head. It looks that way. You can get to 99% of my head. You ask me what I want? I deserve 100%. It's my right as your bondmate. I demand the right to protect you, not when you feel it is convenient, but always when you need it, certainly when you want it. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call me when you woke from nightmares? Why do you hide them? I didn't get that far. In my defense, there's a lot going on. I told myself to protect you from it. I have a nightmare, Venri. My bondmate is hungry, tired, in pain, and in chains of her own making. Technically, it's a blanket. Get me out of this and I will talk, but I can't promise I won't break something else once you get me out of this unless you do it now. Do your feet hurt? Can you stand? Everything hurts. Stand me up and get this off. I don't want to roll over on my finger. You're badass too, by the way. I'm never recovering from this. I take it back. Just load me into a torpedo bay and let me go with dignity. He said about balancing and unraveling her. We are both far past dignity, and we don't have a torpedo bay. Then fucking get me one! When she was free, she punched him with her uninjured hand across the jaw, but under the mandible, and he could tell it hurt her more than it hurt him. She shook her hand out and swore. Her skin split again where she'd punched into an edge of his plates and not much else. She then stepped into his arms as they closed around her. Your nose is bleeding. Again. It'll stop. Don't restrain me again. I make no promises. Sometimes you really like it. Don't be a dumbass and bear a weight concerning us both alone. No promises. Looks like we understand each other. He kissed the top of her head, getting blood in her hair. Venri, you need to remember this. I forgive you for getting me indoctrinated. If you hand me over as a present with a bow wrapped around my mandible, I forgive you. That, and you need to specter up and kill me. I wouldn't want that. Eternity together does sound romantic, but not like that. She leaned into him, and he was grateful she was so small and he only needed one leg. I can't kill you. He stroked her hair. Bullshit, you almost did right now. I'm still really, really angry at you. She shrugged. I'm still really thinking about taking out your other knee. You are not the only one who has a back of the brain. Spirits, I love it when you talk dirty. He decided he'd risk it because backing away from this moment would leave them both isolated and terrified. Everything hurt, and hurt badly, but he had to touch her. He wouldn't allow a shadow to fall between them or her fears to rule. No retreat. He relocated them to the couch, avoiding glass. He wrapped her legs around his back and her arms around his shoulders. He still had bits of glass sticking into him. They were both exhausted and mangled. He held her chin in his hand and told her, You need to know that you can't stop me. I am not a dream you can sculpt to your specifications. No amount of removing my joints or cracking my plates will stop me. You can hit me, you can hurt me. It will not change truth. The truth is that you need me, and there is a price to pay for that. I will not let the fear of losing you keep me from you. I will not allow you to separate from me in order to comfort yourself that you can do without me. You can't. At some point, you are going to have to realize that you made a promise and you need to keep it. If giving me that last 1% of your mind causes your doom, that's just too bad. It's too late. You will need me. You will let me in. What I demand belongs to me, and it is your duty to give it. This isn't theoretical. This isn't human. This is what I require as a Turian bondmate. Her eyes were fire and strength. And if I use you to shut off my mind, to deny reality by flooding my veins with some feeling I can never get for myself alone, that's okay? I should lead you around by your cock? His breathing tripped over itself and then regained pace faster. I'll get you a leash, Bakan. Just see if I complain. Yes, you stupid fucking woman. Yes. Use me. Of course. Use me. Without you, my body has no purpose. He ran up again against the difference between human and Turian. Wasn't she already doing that? Didn't she know that she could? She should? He'd been using her body, taking pride in it. The word, perhaps, was not translated correctly. Humans and shame. Was it all of them or just her? I'll hurt you. Yes, clearly. If anything, I want you more. Not because of the pain itself, but because it means something to see each other in pain. You chose to need me, not just want me. I chose that before you did. Take. Stop being so fucking polite. I am your bondmate, not your waiter. Stop worrying about inconveniencing me and fucking inconvenience me. People might die because Commander Shepard has unleashed Turian. People die every day, Bakan. Live with me. I am so fucked. Yes. She let out a hungry sound before her mouth moved to his. The violence and blood and talk of need scattered through his blood, and he thought in a flash. Blood. That's what's different between Turian and human. Pain in her mouth. Oh, Bakan, your mouth. She was biting at his mouth plates, and he moved her head to the side of his throat. He'd only drawn his own blood one time, and she never did it. That's why I don't get enough of her. He was covered in his own blood, and that let him know. He needed it, not just hers. That's what... He pressed her mouth to his skin. Bite, Bakan. Bite hard enough to taste blood. Bite hard enough to mark. He hadn't asked her before because it was buried too deep. Back of the brain. Bonding. Her teeth were not sharp. His skin was not delicate. She didn't pierce so much as crush, and his spine rattled with it. Turians mated and cut at each other, licked the cuts, and the blood mingled the taste on the tongue. He moved her mouth to his in anticipation and bit at her tongue until he tasted them both in her mouth. She was covered already with his scent. He was covered in hers. If his knee could have held him, he would have had her flat on her back in seconds. He remembered vaguely he'd told her to use him, but his need for her in this moment guided his actions as he lifted her and slammed her down on him, throwing his head back in a long, keening cry as her mouth moved back over to his throat, licking at his blood, kissing him again, wrapping her legs around him tighter until he was as deep as he could be inside her. Reverie turned the pain, singing in all corners of his body, into music, directed by her mouth, and the tight grip of her legs, the wet welcome of her body, and the way he fit her, reached for her, ached and trembled until a new wave of everything being right overcame him. Hands touched her. His mouth urged her, his tongue tasted her, and everything was right again. They would keep discovering things about each other, but they knew how to touch, how to find. If it weren't for the dizziness from blood loss, everything would be perfect, except for all the things that weren't. You do know how much I want to keep you safe in a room, all my own. Oh, spirits pecan, I love you so much. She had 3 broken fingers, 2 broken toes, the gashes, and some glass lacerations. Her hands took the brunt of the damage she'd done to herself while she was hitting him. She was bruised here and there otherwise, but nothing serious. At least he had that. At least, though she'd lost it for good reason, he'd kept it for good reason. He had a shattered knee, 5 plates that required reinforcement, 7 plates requiring relief of pressure from swelling underneath, innumerable patches, 4 broken ribs, a cracked fringe spike, torn skin at the fringe bases, a broken nose, and a fractured jaw. Everything else hurt, too. He would never have to ask again why she didn't cut loose. He had yet to see her full temper because she still had the presence of mind to injure and not kill. The loss of a knee was at least maiming. He smiled because he had a very prominent, human-made bite mark on his neck. He was proud. He was itching for someone to ask. He was hoping it would scar over. No Metagel there, thank you. Dr. Chakwas had not asked any questions, and Morim insisted that she work on Garrus first. The housing and internal workings of his knee were a loss, and she had to construct a replacement. It wasn't as complicated as a human knee due to exoskeleton reinforcement and jointing. He'd have to stay while it was fabricated and then pass a physical examination. He could still get work done from here. It would only be a day or so. Morim never said she was sorry because she wasn't sorry. She had told him the truth. She hadn't made up a lie. He hadn't said he was sorry because he wasn't sorry. He had struck at the truth she'd withheld for too long. She was curled up next to him on the medbay bed after being patched up, his blood still in her hair. Normally, this kind of thing would be a setback in a relationship, considering she'd been tortured by the fact that she couldn't abandon him under even the worst circumstances. He'd just have to bear up under being loved that much. There was no way to reassure her. He couldn't promise her that he'd kill himself before being captured because that would make it worse. He silently vowed to himself that he would kill himself before he would let himself be captured. She'd likely worked out the odds. He didn't need to know them to trust that the thing that drove her to maim him was real enough to worry about. He was less convinced that obsessive worry was a strength she had, and thought perhaps she could attribute brilliance to hard work and planning while awake. Maybe they'd get better at this, find easier paths to truth. Maybe she'd learned the demands of a Turian mate and what that meant. Maybe he'd learn the restraint of a woman not accustomed to caring for herself. What he did know is that she slept for hours, bonelessly trusting. Her only sounds, soft contentment when she shifted position to get closer. That, and she drooled.